Ever notice how some government decisions kind of make your wallet feel a little lighter or heavier?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that's fiscal policy in action.
Yeah.
We're diving into your submitted Investopedia article today to break down this really powerful tool.
It's more than just like numbers on a budget sheet,
Right,
right?
right.
It's about how those decisions create jobs, impact like the price of your morning coffee, and shape the entire economic landscape.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The article's main point is that fiscal policy tries to juggle all of these huge economic forces.
Exactly. We're talking job growth, stable prices so that your money goes further, and overall economic expansion.
So it's about finding that right balance to keep all of these, these different economic factors in harmony.
Yeah.
Speaking of finding balance, the article highlights economist John Maynard Keynes as a central figure in U.S. fiscal policy. What makes his theories so important?
Well, Keynes basically flipped the script on how governments viewed their role in the economy.
Uh-huh.
Before him, the prevailing thought was, like, let the market figure it out.
Yeah.
But Keynes argued that during those really tough times, the government could step in and give the economy a much-needed boost.
That's where the idea of spending money to make money comes in. Right?
Yeah.
It sounds maybe a little strange at first.
It might seem counterintuitive, but it's based on the idea that if the economy is sluggish and people are holding back on spending, the government can step in and stimulate demand, which gets things moving again.
Like giving the economy a jump start when the battery dies. So how exactly does the government jumpstart the economy? The article mentions two main types of fiscal policy: expansionary and contractionary.
Think of it like adjusting the thermostat in your house.
Okay.
When it's too cold, you turn up the heat, right?
Right.
Expansionary fiscal policy is really similar. The government might increase spending, cut taxes, or even both to kind of inject money back into the economy and stimulate growth.
And this takes us to the example of the Great Depression. President Roosevelt used expansionary fiscal policy during that time, didn't he?
He did. And the New Deal programs are a perfect example. Remember those massive public works projects like the WPA, which put millions of Americans back to work building roads and bridges? Or the establishment of Social Security, a safety net for the most vulnerable. Those were huge government initiatives designed to, get the economy back on its feet.
Those are some really tangible examples of how government spending can have a direct impact on people's lives. But the article also mentions deficit suspending, the government spending more than it takes in through taxes. Doesn't that raise some red flags?
It's a valid concern, and it's one of the most debated aspects of fiscal policy.
Right.
Deficit spending essentially means the government is going into debt to finance its spending.
So it's a calculated risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The idea is that by stimulating the economy, you eventually generate more economic activity and more tax revenue, which helps pay down the debt over time. But it's definitely a balancing act.
Okay, that makes sense. So if expansionary policy is like turning up the heat, what about when the economy gets overheated? Like when inflation starts to climb and prices go crazy.
You're spot on. That's where contractionary fiscal policy comes in. It's like turning down the thermostat to cool things down. This might involve measures like raising taxes or reducing government spending to try and, rein in inflation.
But isn't that a hard sell politically? I mean, nobody wants to vote for higher taxes or fewer government services, right?
You're hitting on a crucial point.
Yeah.
Contractionary policies, while sometimes necessary to keep inflation in check, are often unpopular. It's a delicate balancing act for policymakers.
It sounds like it. Now, is the government the only one calling the shots in this economic balancing act? The article also mentions something called monetary policy. How does that fit into the picture?
Excellent question. If we think about managing the economy, like driving a car,
Okay.
fiscal policy is like one person with their hands on the steering wheel and gas pedal. But there's another person in the car, the Federal Reserve, and they control monetary policy.
Two drivers, one car. This is getting interesting. Tell me more.
So while the government uses spending and taxes, fiscal policy, the Federal Reserve has its own set of tools to influence the economy. They focus on things like interest rates and the money supply.
Okay.
For example, if the economy needs a boost, the Fed might lower interest rates to make borrowing cheaper, encouraging spending and investment.
It's almost like two drivers trying to reach the same destination, but maybe with slightly different ideas about the best route to get there.
That's a great analogy. Fiscal and monetary policy often work in tandem, but they can sometimes be at odds, especially when you have different political agendas at play.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on how the economy works. So it's not just about understanding these policies in isolation, but also how they interact with each other and the political realities that shape them. This is fascinating stuff.
It really is. And it leads perfectly to some key takeaways and a thought-provoking question for you.
So we're back. I'm starting to see how much goes into managing an economy. It's like a giant machine with all these moving parts, and fiscal policy is one of the big levers they use to keep it running.
It is. And remember, even though we're talking about macroeconomics, these policies have a very real impact on, like, your day-to-day life.
Absolutely. Okay, before the break, we were comparing fiscal and monetary policy. It sounds like those two are always making headlines, often as a point of contention.
Yeah, you're right. It can be a real dance between the government and the Federal Reserve.
Hmm.
And like any good dance partners, sometimes they step on each other's toes.
So walk me through that. What are some of the potential points of friction?
Well, a key difference is their respective timeframes. The government, through its fiscal policies, often has its eye on the short term, boosting a slowing economy before an election.
Right.
The Federal Reserve, on the other hand, plays more of a long game, focusing on sustainable growth and stable prices over the long haul.
So let's say the government wants to create jobs right now. They might lean towards spending more, even if it means increasing the deficit. But the Federal Reserve, with its long-term view, might be worried about inflation down the line and prefer a more cautious approach.
Precisely. Balancing those short-term needs with long-term stability is one of the trickiest parts. And it's important to remember that there's no, like, one-size-fits-all solution.
It's not an exact science. So much depends on the current state of the economy, global events, even political pressures. It sounds like a lot to keep track of.
It is. And that's why understanding even the basics of fiscal policy can be so empowering. It helps you make sense of the news, have more informed conversations, and even advocate for the economic policies you believe in.
Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to something as important as the economy. So to recap for our listener, what are some key takeaways from our deep dive into fiscal policy?
Well, first and foremost, fiscal policy is a powerful tool that governments use to influence the economy. It involves two main levers: government spending and taxes.
And just like you wouldn't use a hammer for every job, the government needs to use the right fiscal policy tools for the given situation.
That's a great point. When the economy is sluggish, they might use expansionary policies, increasing spending, cutting taxes, or both to stimulate growth.
Like stepping on the gas to speed things up.
Exactly. But when the economy is overheating and inflation becomes a concern, they might use contractionary policies, raising taxes or cutting spending to, cool things down.
So it's like easing off the gas or even tapping the brakes a little.
A perfect analogy. It's about finding that sweet spot to keep things running smoothly.
And we can't forget about that other driver in the car, right? The Federal Reserve with its monetary policy tools.
Right. They're like the co-pilot, keeping an eye on the gauges and making adjustments with interest rates and the money supply to keep the economy on track.
It really makes you appreciate the teamwork involved in managing a complex system like the economy.
Yeah.
But like any good team, there must be times when they don't see eye to eye.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like any good partnership, communication and coordination are key, especially since their goals and timelines might differ. The government might prioritize those short-term wins while the Fed focuses on long-term stability, which can sometimes lead to tension. Yep.
It's fascinating to consider those dynamics and how they play out in the real world. This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the intricacies of fiscal policy and its impact on, well, everything from jobs to prices.
Yeah, it's all interconnected, isn't it? And it affects your life in more ways than you might realize.
Exactly. Now, before we wrap things up, I know you have a thought-provoking question to leave our listener with, something to ponder as they navigate this complex economic landscape.
I do. We've explored the tools of fiscal policy, the challenges of balancing growth and stability, and the that delicate dance between the government and the Federal Reserve. So my question for you is this: imagine you're advising the president on fiscal policy right now. What would be your top priority? Would you push for increased spending to boost job creation, even if it means increasing the deficit? Or would you prioritize tackling inflation, even if it means making some really tough decisions about taxes and spending cuts?
That's a great question. There's no easy answer, is there? It really makes you think about your own economic priorities and what you believe is best for the country's future.
Precisely. And that's what makes this such an important and engaging topic. Fiscal policy is a conversation we should all be a part of. by understanding the basics, staying informed, and engaging in thoughtful debate, we can all contribute to shaping a more prosperous and equitable future.
Well said. That's a perfect note to end on. Listener, we hope this deep dive into fiscal policy has empowered you with the knowledge and context to navigate this complex but fascinating subject. Until next time, stay curious.